The battle for Earth began not with explosions or laser beams, but with the most beautiful noise ever created in the history of the universe. As the Devourers entered the inner solar system, humanity unleashed 40 years of preparation in a coordinated transmission that made their test broadcast look like a whisper. Every person on Earth and throughout the solar system added their voice to a signal so chaotic and creative that it defied comprehension. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, which had been converted into a mobile transmission platform bristling with quantum communication arrays. His ship led a fleet of vessels positioned at strategic points throughout the solar system, each one broadcasting a different aspect of human culture at maximum power. The space around Earth pulsed with exotic radiation, carrying everything from mathematical theorems to nursery rhymes to the random thoughts of people trying to fall asleep. Devourer formation is 2 hours from Earth orbit, reported Commander Alex Rivera from his position aboard the defense station Defiance. They're moving through our outer transmission field and showing signs of confusion, but they're still advancing. Dr. Lisa Hayes monitored the alien response from the primary control center on Earth. The Devourers were unlike anything in her xenological studies. They appeared as shifting clouds of dark energy that seemed to absorb light and matter as they moved through space. But when they encountered the human transmission, they flickered and sparked like electronic devices experiencing power surges. "The signal is definitely affecting them," Lisa announced to the Global Command Network. "Their movement patterns are becoming erratic, and some of the smaller entities appear to be breaking away from the main formation." Nina Price conducted her symphony of chaos from a specially designed studio that connected her to every transmission array on Earth and throughout the solar system. She had spent years developing the theoretical framework for this moment, and now she was improvising in real time as humanity fought for its survival with pure creative expression. "Increase the emotional content in sectors 7 through 12. Nina commanded as she watched data streams showing the alien response. "They're trying to filter out the logical components, but they can't process the contradictions and feelings. Hit them with more love songs mixed with scientific data." Lieutenant Sam Brooks coordinated the technical aspects of the transmission from his station, surrounded by screens showing input from around the world. Beijing is contributing traditional opera mixed with quantum computing algorithms. São Paulo is broadcasting carnival music with philosophical debates about consciousness. Mumbai is sending Bollywood musicals interrupted by discussions of advanced mathematics. The result was a signal that no organized intelligence could possibly understand or consume. Human communication had always been chaotic, but never before had that chaos been weaponized on such a scale. The transmission contained every contradiction that made humanity unique, love and hate existing simultaneously, scientific rationality mixed with pure emotion, art that served no practical purpose except to make people feel something beautiful. As the Devourers pushed deeper into the solar system, they encountered something that had never existed before in galactic history. Previous civilizations had tried to fight them with weapons or hide from them in silence. But humans were attacking them with weaponized creativity, and the ancient entities had no defense against pure imaginative chaos. "Multiple Devourer entities are retreating from the main formation," Alex reported with excitement in his voice. "The smaller ones seem unable to process our signal at all. They're falling back toward the outer system." But the victory was incomplete. The largest and most ancient of the Devourers continued advancing toward Earth. These beings had survived for millions of years by consuming the communication networks of entire galactic civilizations. They were learning to adapt to the human transmission by filtering out the chaotic elements and focusing on the underlying organizational structures. The big ones are getting through, Jake announced from his position near Jupiter. They're ignoring the emotional content and targeting the technical data streams. We need to change our approach. Nina made a decision that would have seemed insane to any previous generation. Remove all organizational structure from the transmission. No more logical sequences, no more coherent data streams. Pure stream of consciousness from every human being simultaneously. The change was immediate and dramatic. Instead of broadcasting organized content, the quantum arrays began transmitting the raw, unfiltered thoughts and feelings of 8 billion human beings. Every random idea, every emotional response, every half-formed thought and silly observation flowed into space in a torrent of pure consciousness that defied any attempt at analysis or consumption. The effect on the devourers was devastating. Beings that had fed on structured communication for millions of years suddenly found themselves choking on pure human chaos. The largest entities began to flicker and destabilize as they tried to process thoughts that contradicted themselves from moment to moment. Unknown contacts approaching from the Kithra system, Sam announced as new signals appeared on the long-range sensors. Multiple ships moving at high speed toward Earth. Elder Zareth appeared on the main communication screen, and for the first time in recorded history, his musical voice carried excitement instead of fear. "Remarkable, Captain Morrison! Your species has accomplished something we thought impossible. The Devourers are retreating from your transmission." "Are you here to help?" Jake asked hopefully. "We are here to learn," Zareth replied. "For 50,000 years we have hidden in silence, believing it was the only way to survive. But you have shown us that communication itself can be a weapon against our ancient enemies." More ships arrived from hidden civilizations throughout the galaxy. Species that had remained silent for millennia began cautiously adding their voices to the human transmission. The crystalline harmony singers contributed musical mathematics that complemented human emotional chaos. The Resonance Collective shared their hive mind perspectives that confused the Devourers with thoughts that came from multiple consciousness simultaneously. But the most important addition came from an unexpected source. The quantum poets of the Spiral Arm Alliance had been listening to human broadcasts for years, and they understood something crucial about the nature of creative expression. They began transmitting poetry that existed in quantum superposition, meaning it expressed contradictory ideas simultaneously until observed. "The combination is working," Lisa announced as she monitored the battle. "Human chaos mixed with alien creativity is creating something the Devourers have never encountered. They literally cannot process communication that refuses to follow logical patterns." The largest Devourer made one final attempt to reach Earth by focusing all its energy on consuming the transmission arrays themselves. It sent tendrils of dark energy toward the planet, trying to silence the source of the chaotic signal. But humanity had prepared for this possibility. Children from around the world had been practicing for months to add their voices to the transmission at the crucial moment. When the ancient entity tried to attack Earth directly, it was met with the sound of millions of young humans singing nursery rhymes mixed with their questions about why the sky is blue and whether aliens like ice cream. The combination of pure innocence and chaotic curiosity was more than the Devourer could handle. An entity that had consumed the voices of countless civilizations found itself completely unable to process the unfiltered wonder of human children. It recoiled from Earth as if burned and began retreating toward the edge of the solar system. All devourer entities are withdrawing, Alex reported with amazement. They're heading back toward intergalactic space at maximum speed. The victory was overwhelming and immediate. For the first time in galactic history, a species had not only survived an encounter with the devourers, but had actively driven them away. More importantly, the success had inspired other civilizations to break their ancient silence. Communication networks that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came alive as species throughout the galaxy began talking to each other again. The Builder's ancient dream of galactic unity was being reborn, as worlds that had hidden in isolation for thousands of years started sharing their cultures and knowledge. President Walsh addressed the combined populations of Earth and the emerging galactic community from the primary transmission center. Today, we learn that our greatest weakness, our inability to communicate in organized, logical ways, is actually our greatest strength. We are loud, we are chaotic, we contradict ourselves constantly, and apparently that makes us impossible for cosmic predators to digest. Nina Price stood beside the quantum broadcast arrays that had saved not just humanity, but the entire galaxy, and reflected on what they had accomplished. We didn't defeat the Devourers with superior technology or military force. We confused them with pure creativity until they gave up and went home. Dr. Hayes was already working with alien scientists to understand the broader implications of their victory. The Devourers fed on communication patterns that followed predictable, logical structures. But human expression is inherently illogical. We create art for no practical. The construction sites stretched across every continent on Earth, like massive flowers made of metal and crystal reaching toward the stars. Dr. Lisa Hayes stood on the observation deck of the primary transmission array in Kazakhstan and watched thousands of workers putting the finishing touches on humanity's greatest gamble. The quantum broadcast towers rose 3 kilometers into the sky, and their crystalline cores pulsed with energy patterns that had never existed before in the universe. It had taken 30 years to build the network that would either save humanity or destroy them completely. Every nation on Earth had contributed resources and expertise to create transmission arrays powerful enough to broadcast across the entire galaxy. But these were not simple radio towers. They were weapons designed to fire pure human consciousness at cosmic predators. Engineer Ryan Torres climbed the stairs to join Lisa on the observation platform. He was covered in grease and looked exhausted from months of non-stop work, but his eyes showed the satisfaction of someone who had helped build something truly revolutionary. Ryan had designed the quantum resonance chambers that would amplify human communication beyond anything previously imagined. Final systems check is complete, Ryan reported as he wiped his hands on a dirty cloth. All arrays are synchronized and ready for the test transmission. Nina wants to run one more rehearsal before we commit to the full broadcast. Lisa nodded and followed Ryan down to the main control center where Nina Price was conducting what looked like the most chaotic orchestra in human history. The composer had spent decades developing the theoretical framework for weaponized communication, and now she was ready to put it into practice. Hundreds of screens showed feeds from around the world as people prepared to add their voices to the galactic chorus. "This is it," Nina announced to the assembled technicians and coordinators. "In 6 hours, we begin the largest coordinated transmission in human history. Every person on Earth will have the opportunity to contribute something to the signal. Stories, songs, arguments, scientific data, personal memories, cultural traditions, and everything else that makes us human. Lieutenant Sam Brooks had been promoted to communications director for the project, and he was monitoring the data streams that would feed into the transmission. All collection points are online, he reported. We're receiving input in over 3,000 languages and dialects. The quantum processors are managing to encode everything into coherent information packets. Coherent is not what we want, Nina reminded him with a smile. The whole point is to create something so beautifully chaotic that the devourers can't process it. Make sure we're preserving all the contradictions and emotional content. Lisa watched the screens showing feeds from around the world and marveled at what humanity had accomplished. In New York City, musicians were performing everything from classical symphonies to death metal in recording studios connected to the transmission network. In Tokyo, poets were reciting verses in ancient Japanese, while children told jokes and sang nursery rhymes. In London, scientists were dictating their latest research while comedians performed stand-up routines about quantum physics. Every form of human expression was being captured and prepared for broadcast. Love letters from soldiers to their families, philosophical debates from university classrooms, arguments between married couples about whose turn it was to take out the garbage, technical manuals for spaceship engines, religious prayers in dozens of different faiths, fictional stories about heroes and monsters and everything in between. The diversity is incredible, Lisa said as she reviewed the incoming data. We're literally broadcasting the entire spectrum of human thought and culture. That's the idea, Nina replied. The builders and other fallen civilizations communicated in organized, efficient ways. Their transmissions followed logical patterns that the devourers could easily consume. But human communication is beautifully messy. We contradict ourselves, we express emotions along with facts, and we create art that serves no practical purpose, except to make us feel something. Captain Jake Morrison had returned from his latest scouting mission to the edge of the solar system, where long-range sensors were tracking the approaching devourers. They're still 18 months out, he reported as he entered the control center. Moving slowly but steadily toward Earth. The Kythera estimates were accurate. Any change in their behavior? Lisa asked. None that we can detect, Jake replied. They're still following the trail of our radio transmissions like they have been for the past 30 years. No indication that they know what we're planning. Ryan checked his instruments and announced that all systems were ready for the test. Power levels are optimal and the quantum resonance chambers are stable. We can begin the preliminary broadcast. Whenever you give the word. Nina took a deep breath and looked around at the people who had spent decades preparing for this moment. Remember, everyone, the goal is not to defeat the devourers with superior firepower. We're going to confuse them, overwhelm them, and hopefully give them the worst case of cosmic indigestion in galactic history. She activated the primary transmission sequence, and suddenly the air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. The quantum broadcast towers around the world hummed to life and began pumping human consciousness into space at the speed of light. Every thought, every song, every story that had been collected was transformed into exotic radiation that would reach the approaching devourers in a matter of hours. But this was just the test. The real broadcast would begin when the devourers arrived in the solar system, and humanity would have to prove that chaos could triumph over cosmic horror. The months that followed were filled with preparation and growing tension. Reports from The edge of the solar system confirmed that the Devourers were responding to the test transmission. Their movement patterns changed slightly as they encountered the chaotic human signal. Some seemed confused, while others appeared to be analyzing the strange new form of communication they had discovered. Captain Morrison led a fleet of ships carrying specialized transmission equipment to key positions throughout the solar system. Each vessel was equipped with backup arrays that could continue broadcasting even if Earth was attacked. Lieutenant Brooks coordinated with hidden survivors throughout the galaxy who had agreed to monitor the battle and potentially join the fight if humanity's strategy showed promise. The Kythera had been quietly supportive of the human plan, despite their skepticism about its chances of success. Elder Zareth had provided detailed information about devourer behavior and tactics based on thousands of years of observation. Other hidden species remained silent, but some had begun preparing their own transmission equipment just in case the humans managed to find a weakness in their ancient enemies. Dr. Hayes continued studying the Builder records and made a crucial discovery about how the Devourers actually consumed communication. "They don't just feed on organized information," she announced during a briefing 3 months before the expected arrival. "They specifically target the emotional and creative content that gives communication meaning. They're not just destroying the ability to speak, they're destroying the desire to have anything worth saying." Which explains why the survivors have remained hidden for so long, Nina realized. It's not just fear that keeps them silent. The Devourers have conditioned them to believe that communication itself is dangerous and pointless. But humans have never been good at staying quiet when we have something to say, Sam added with determination, "even when it gets us in trouble." Sure. Final weeks before the Devourers arrived were spent refining the broadcast protocols and recruiting volunteers from every corner of human civilization: musicians, composers, writers, scientists, philosophers, comedians, children, grandparents, and everyone in between, prepared to add their voices to the signal that would either save or doom their species. Nina had organized the transmission into what she called a symphony of chaos. Different regions of Earth would contribute different types of content in overlapping waves that created patterns too complex for any organized intelligence to fully comprehend. Technical data would be mixed with love songs. Scientific proofs would be interrupted by children's laughter. Philosophical debates would be conducted simultaneously in multiple languages with no attempt to reach consensus. "The beauty is in the contradiction," Nina explained to a gathering of world leaders. "We're going to hit them with pure, undiluted humanity. Every crazy, wonderful, terrible, beautiful aspect of our species broadcast at maximum power directly into their feeding mechanisms." On the day the Devourers entered the outer solar system, President Walsh stood before the assembled representatives of every nation on Earth. "Today we find out if humanity's greatest weakness can become our greatest strength. We've never been a quiet species, and we're not about to start now." The transmission began at exactly noon Greenwich Mean Time, with children from around the world singing traditional lullabies in their native languages. Within minutes, the signal expanded to include everything from quantum physics lectures to death metal concerts to elderly people telling stories about their grandchildren. The quantum broadcast arrays pumped this magnificent chaos into space at unprecedented power levels, creating a wall of pure human expression that raced toward the emergency session of the Global Defense Council had been running for 18 hours straight, and President Karen Walsh could see the exhaustion and fear in every face around the massive conference table. Captain Jake Morrison had returned to Earth with news that changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. The galaxy was not empty and waiting for them to explore it. It was full of hidden survivors who lived in terror of ancient predators that fed on the very act of communication. Admiral Tony Clark stood at the head of the table, pointing to a holographic display that showed Earth's radio emissions spreading out into space like ripples in a pond. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes who had spent his career preparing for military threats from other nations. Now he faced something far worse than enemy armies. "The math is simple," Admiral Clark said to the assembled leaders. "For over a century, we have been broadcasting radio signals, television transmissions, and digital communications into space. Every transmission has been marking our location for these devourers. We have exactly 47 years before they arrive at Earth based on the Kythera estimates, and their solution is for us to go completely silent," added Secretary of Science Maria Santos as she reviewed the data from the New Horizon mission. "No more radio broadcasts, no more satellite communications, no more attempts to contact other worlds. They want us to hide like every other surviving species." President Walsh looked around the table at the representatives from every nation on Earth. Some faces showed determination, while others revealed barely controlled panic. The revelation that humanity was being hunted by cosmic predators had shattered many assumptions about their future among the stars. "What exactly are we dealing with?" asked General Pete Gibson, who commanded Earth's orbital defense systems. "Can these devourers be killed with conventional weapons?" Dr. Lisa Hayes had been invited to brief the council about her research into the alien records. She stood and activated a display showing the crystalline data they had recovered from the Builder City. "The devourers exist partially outside normal space-time," she explained. "Physical weapons pass right through them. They appear to be energy beings that feed on organized information and communication patterns." "How do they destroy civilizations?" President Walsh asked. "They don't destroy in the traditional sense," Lisa replied. "According to the Builder records, the devourers attach themselves to a species' communication networks. They consume the ability to form complex thoughts and express ideas. People affected by them lose the capacity for language creativity and abstract reasoning. They become silent, and then they simply fade away." Representative Mary Collins from the Communications Committee leaned forward with concern. "Are you saying they can attack us through our own technology?" "That appears to be their primary method," Lisa confirmed. "They follow radio waves and quantum transmissions like a trail, leading directly to inhabited worlds. Once they arrive, they can influence any being that attempts to communicate electronically." Admiral Clark used this information to support his position. "Which is why we need to shut down all non-essential communications immediately. We stop broadcasting into space, we dismantle the deep space communication arrays, and we go dark for the next 50 years. It's our only chance of survival." "That's not survival," argued Dr. Hayes with passion in her voice. "That's surrendering everything that makes civilization worth preserving. You're talking about ending the space program, stopping all interstellar research, and cutting Earth off from the rest of the galaxy." "The rest of the galaxy has already cut itself off," General Gibson pointed out. "The Kythera have survived for thousands of years by maintaining communication silence. Their system works. Their system is a prison," Lisa shot back. "I've studied the historical records from before the silence began. The galaxy was once filled with incredible diversity of thought and culture. Species shared art and science and philosophy across the stars. The devourers didn't just kill civilizations, they killed the very idea of galactic community." Lieutenant Sam Brooks had also been invited to speak to the council about the technical aspects of the threat. He stood nervously and addressed the assembled leaders. "Ma'am, I've been analyzing the communication patterns that the devourers seem to target. They appear to feed specifically on organized, structured information. Random noise doesn't attract them, but deliberate transmissions do. "What's your point, Lieutenant?" President Walsh asked. "Well, ma'am, what if we could find a way to communicate that doesn't follow their expected patterns?" Sam suggested. "Something so chaotic and unpredictable that they can't process it properly." Admiral Clark dismissed the idea immediately. "That's wishful thinking, Lieutenant. We're talking about beings that have consumed hundreds of galactic civilizations. You think we can outsmart them with clever radio tricks?" "Maybe not outsmart them," said a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Nina Price, the famous composer and linguist who had been quietly observing the proceedings. She was a small woman with wild, curly hair and eyes that seemed to see connections others missed. "But we might be able to give them indigestion." President Walsh gestured for Nina to approach the speaker's table. "Explain. I've been listening to your descriptions of how these devourers operate," Nina said as she walked forward. "They feed on organized communication patterns. But what if we could create a form of transmission that's so inherently disorganized that it acts like poison to them?" "You're talking about weaponizing communication itself," Lisa said with growing excitement. "Exactly," Nina replied. "Human culture is incredibly diverse and chaotic. We have thousands of languages, hundreds of art forms, millions of individual creative expressions. What if instead of going silent, we started broadcasting everything all at once?" General Gibson looked skeptical. "That sounds like exactly what would attract their attention, or overwhelm their ability to process it," Nina countered. "Think about it. These beings have spent millennia feeding on civilizations that communicate in organized, predictable ways. They've never encountered a species that throws pure creative chaos at them." President Walsh was intrigued by the possibility. "What would this look like in practical terms?" Nina's eyes lit up as she began explaining her vision. "We build massive transmission arrays on every continent, but instead of sending simple radio signals, we broadcast the full spectrum of human expression. Music, poetry, scientific data, personal conversations, arguments, jokes, love letters, children's stories, mathematical proofs, philosophical debates. Everything humanity has ever thought or felt, transmitted simultaneously in every language we've ever developed." "That's insane," Admiral Clark said flatly. "You want to make us the loudest species in the galaxy right when we're being hunted by predators that track communication. I want to make us indigestible," Nina replied firmly. "Physical weapons can't hurt these things. But what about intellectual chaos? What about creative overload? What if we hit them with so much beautiful, disorganized human noise that they choke on it?" Dr. Hayes was studying the builder records on her tablet. "Actually, this might have some basis in the historical data. The builders were highly organized in their communications. Everything was structured, logical, efficient. Very similar to the other species that fell to the devourers. And humans are the opposite of organized," Sam added with a slight smile. "We argue about everything we create art that makes no logical sense, and half our communications are emotional rather than rational." President Walsh looked around the table and saw that the council was split between two completely different approaches to survival. One faction wanted to hide in silence like the other surviving species. The other wanted to fight back using humanity's greatest strength, which was their complete inability to communicate in an organized fashion. "The risk is enormous either way," she said finally. "If we go silent, we might save ourselves, but we'll lose everything that makes us human. If we try this broadcast strategy, we might destroy ourselves, attracting the very predators we're trying to avoid. Ma'am, if I may, Lieutenant Brooks spoke up again. "We're going to attract their attention eventually anyway. Our radio signals have been spreading across space for decades. The Devourers already know we exist and where to find us. The question is whether we meet them with silence or with the loudest, most chaotic transmission in galactic history." Representative Collins raised another concern. What about the other surviving species, the Kythera, and whoever else might be hiding out there? If we start broadcasting everything, we might be endangering them too, or we might be offering them hope, Lisa suggested. Think about what Elder Zareth told us. The survivors have been hiding in isolation for thousands of years. Maybe it's time someone reminded the galaxy what it means to have a voice. The debate continued for another 6 hours as the Council wrestled with a decision that would determine humanity's future. President Walsh listened to every argument and weighed every possibility. In the end, the choice came down to a simple question about what kind of species humans wanted to be. "We've spent our entire history as a species making noise," President Walsh said, as she called for the final vote. "We've painted on cave walls, written epic poems, launched radio signals at the stars, and never stopped." 3 months had passed since the discovery on Kepler 442b, and the New Horizon was still traveling deeper into unexplored space. Captain Jake Morrison had sent regular reports back to Earth about the dead civilization they had found, but each transmission took longer to reach home as they moved further from the solar system. The crew was starting to feel truly alone among the stars. Dr. Lisa Hayes spent most of her time studying the crystal recordings they had brought back from the alien city. She had managed to decode some of the language, and what she learned made her sleep badly at night. The civilization called themselves the Builders, and they had created the most advanced society in galactic history. But something had hunted them across the stars until they had no choice but to hide in silence or die. Lieutenant Sam Brooks was monitoring the communication frequencies as always when his instruments detected something that made him sit up straight in his chair. For the first time since leaving Earth, his equipment was picking up artificial signals. Not the random noise that stars and planets made, but real organized transmissions that could only come from intelligent life. "Captain," Sam called out with excitement. "I'm detecting structured radio waves coming from the Harmony Prime system. Someone is trying to communicate." Jake rushed to the communications station and looked at the data flowing across Sam's screens. The signals were unlike anything in Earth's databases. They used frequencies and modulation patterns that human technology had never attempted, but there was no doubt that these transmissions were being sent by beings with advanced knowledge. "Of physics and engineering. Can you decode any of it?" Jake asked. Sam shook his head while he worked to isolate the signal. "The language is completely unknown, but the mathematical structures suggest they're trying to establish first contact protocols. They want to talk, Captain." Jake felt a mixture of excitement and fear. After finding only dead worlds and empty space, they had finally encountered a living civilization. But the fate of the Builders made him cautious about making contact with anyone. Whatever had destroyed the Galactic Empire might still be hunting among the stars. "Set course for Harmony Prime," Jake ordered. "But keep our weapons ready and maintain communication silence until we know what we're dealing with." The Harmony Prime system contained 7 planets orbiting a young blue star. Long-range scans showed that most of the worlds were too hot or too cold to support life, but the 3rd planet had the right conditions for liquid water and breathable atmosphere. More importantly, their sensors detected massive artificial structures in orbit around the planet and on its surface. As the New Horizon approached the system, Jake was amazed by what he saw. Elegant ships that looked more like works of art than military vessels moved between the planets. Space stations that resembled giant flowers hung in perfect formation around the star. Everything was designed with curves and organic shapes that suggested a species very different from humans. But what impressed Jake most was how quiet everything was. Despite having obviously advanced technology, the aliens were using very low power transmissions that could barely be detected beyond their own system. They were being careful not to make too much noise in the galaxy. The alien ships noticed the New Horizon as soon as it entered the outer edge of the system. 3 vessels that looked like flying jellyfish moved to intercept them. The ships were beautiful, but Jake could see weapon ports hidden among their graceful curves. These beings had learned to be ready for trouble. Incoming transmission, Sam announced. They're using our own communication protocols, Captain. Somehow they learned human languages from our signals. The main screen activated, and Jake found himself looking at his first living alien. The being had a tall, thin body covered in pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Its head was elongated and crowned with flowing tentacles that moved like hair in an unfelt breeze. Most striking were its eyes, which were large and silver and seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. "Greetings, humans," the alien said in perfect English, though its voice had a musical quality that no human throat could produce. "I am Elder Zareth of the Kythera. We have been expecting you for some time." Jake stepped forward and tried to project confidence despite his nervousness. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. We come in peace seeking knowledge and friendship with other species." Elder Zareth made a gesture that might have been a bow. "We know why you have come, Captain Morrison. You have found the ruins of the Builders, and you seek answers about what destroyed them. We are perhaps the only ones left who remember those times." "You knew the Builders?" Lisa asked as she joined Jake in front of the screen. "We traded with them for 3,000 years, Zareth replied. "The Kythera are old, Captain. We have survived since before the Great Silence fell across the galaxy. We remember when the stars themselves sang with the voices of 1,000,000 worlds." Jake felt his heart racing. "What happened to them?" Zareth was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his musical voice carried deep sadness. "They made too much noise, Captain. They broadcast their presence across the galaxy without understanding what was listening in the darkness between the stars." "Something was hunting them," Alex said, as he moved to stand beside Jake. "Something is always hunting those who speak, too." "Loudly," Zareth confirmed. "The devourers of discourse have existed since before the first civilizations learned to make fire. They drift in the empty spaces between galaxies, waiting for signals to guide them to new feeding grounds." Lisa leaned forward with scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "What do they devour exactly?" "Communication itself," Zareth explained. "They feed on the ability of thinking beings to express ideas and share thoughts. When they find a world, they do not simply destroy it. They consume its very capacity for language and creativity until its people fall into permanent silence and then fade away." Jake felt cold understanding wash over him. "That's why the galaxy is so quiet. Everyone is hiding. The surviving species learned that silence means survival," Zareth said. "We communicate only when necessary and only using the weakest possible signals. We have abandoned the great networks that once connected our worlds. We live in isolation and fear, but we live." Sam looked up from his communication equipment with worry on his face. "Captain, our transmissions back to Earth. If these devourers can track radio signals, then we've been leading them straight to the solar system. Your species has already been detected. Zaraf confirmed what they all feared. Human radio broadcasts have been spreading across the galaxy for over a century. The devourers know where to find Earth. They are coming. The bridge of the New Horizon fell silent as the crew absorbed this terrible news. Everything humanity had done to reach out to the stars had been marking them for destruction. Every message they had sent into space had been like ringing a dinner bell for cosmic predators. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "The devourers do not." "Move quickly," Zaref replied. "They drift between galaxies at speeds far below light. But once they begin hunting a species, they never stop. Your people have perhaps 50 of your years before they arrive at Earth." "Can they be fought?" Alex demanded. "What weapons work against them?" Zaref's tentacles moved in what might have been the alien equivalent of shaking his head. "Weapons are useless against beings that exist partially outside normal space. The Builders had technology far beyond anything your species has developed, and it did not save them. The only defense is silence. You're asking us to give up everything. That makes us human?" Lisa said with anger in her voice. "No more radio, no more television, no more communication with other worlds. We would have to live like prisoners in our own solar system." "That is the price of survival," Zaref said simply. "Every species that has lasted since the silence began has made the same choice. We speak only in whispers now, and we never broadcast beyond our own worlds." Jake studied the alien leader's face and saw the weight of centuries of fear and isolation. The Kithara had survived by surrendering everything that made civilization worth having. They existed, but they no longer truly lived. What if there was another way? Jake asked. What if instead of hiding we found a way to fight back? Impossible, Zaref replied immediately. Hundreds of species tried to resist the Devourers. The Builders were the last to make the attempt, and you have seen their fate. The galaxy learned that defiance leads only to extinction. But the galaxy was never united when it fought them, Lisa pointed out. Each species faced the Devourers alone. What if all the surviving civilizations worked together? Zaref's silver eyes seemed to grow brighter with what might have been hope before dimming again. The surviving species no longer trust each other. We have lived in isolation for too long. Most would not even admit to strangers that they still exist. Then it's up to us, Jake said with growing determination. Humanity won't hide in silence. We'll find another way. You do not understand the magnitude of what you face, Zaref warned. The Devourers have consumed entire galactic civilizations. What can one young species possibly do against such power? Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same stubborn determination in their faces that had driven humans to reach for the stars despite the dangers. They were afraid, but they were not ready to surrender their voices to cosmic monsters, Zer. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars through the main window. The ship had been traveling for 3 months now, and every day felt the same. The universe was quiet and empty and cold. Jake had been waiting his whole life for this moment. But now that he was here flying between the stars, he felt nothing but disappointment. The New Horizon was the first human ship that could travel faster than light. Earth had spent 50 years building it after they finally figured out how to bend space and time. Jake remembered being a young boy and looking up at the night sky, wondering if anyone was out there waiting to meet them. Now he was 45, years old, and the captain of humanity's greatest achievement, and all they had found was silence. Dr. Lisa Hayes walked onto the bridge carrying a tablet in her hands. She was the ship's expert on alien life and ancient civilizations. Lisa had brown hair that she always kept tied back and serious green eyes that seemed to see things others missed. She had been studying the data from their latest scan, and Jake could tell from her face that she had found something interesting. "Captain, we need to change course," Lisa said, as she handed him the tablet. "There's something on Kepler 442b that doesn't belong." Jake looked at the screen and saw the planet they had been approaching for the last week. It was a rocky world about the same size as Earth, with thick clouds covering most of its surface. The scans showed it had water and an atmosphere that could support life, but no signs that anything was actually living there. "What kind of something?" Jake asked as he studied the readings. "Structures," Lisa replied, pointing to a section of the data. "Geometric patterns that are too regular to be natural. Someone built cities down there, Captain." Jake felt his heart start beating faster. After months of finding nothing but dead rocks and empty space, they might have finally discovered proof that humans were not alone in the universe. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Sam Brooks, who was sitting at his station monitoring the radio frequencies. "Sam, are you picking up any signals from the planet?" Jake asked. Sam shook his head without looking up from his instruments. He was a thin young man with blonde hair who had joined the mission because he believed they would find other civilizations to talk to. "Nothing, Captain. No radio waves, no quantum transmissions, no communication of any kind. If there's anyone. Down there, they're not trying to talk to us." Jake made his decision quickly. "Set course for the planet. Alert the landing team that we're going down to take a look." 6 hours later, Jake was standing on the surface of an alien world for the first time in his life. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth, and the air had a metallic taste that made him glad for his breathing mask. The sky was a pale orange color, and 2 small moons hung visible in the daylight. But none of that mattered, because spread out in front of them was a city unlike anything humans had ever built. The buildings were made of a smooth black material that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. They rose from the ground in spirals and curves that defied human understanding of architecture. Some were as tall as mountains, while others seemed to grow from the earth like strange geometric trees. Lisa knelt down and ran her gloved hands over a piece of rubble near their landing site. "This material is incredible," she said with excitement in her voice. "It's some kind of crystalline structure, but it's been shaped by tools, not natural forces." Commander Alex Rivera moved past them with his weapon drawn. He was the ship's tactical officer, and he never let his guard down even when they seemed to be alone. Alex was a big man with dark skin and careful eyes, who had served in Earth's military before joining the space program. "The place feels wrong," he said as he scanned the empty streets. "A city this size should have some signs of recent activity. Where did everyone go?" They spent the next 4 hours exploring the alien structures. Every building was empty and covered in dust that suggested no one had been there for a very long time. The technology they found was far beyond anything humans had developed. Walls that could change their shape with a touch. Rooms that seemed to generate their own light from nowhere. Transportation tubes that could move objects instantly from one place to another. But the most amazing discovery came when Lisa found what looked like a library deep inside the largest building. The walls were covered with thousands of crystal panels that glowed with soft blue light when she approached them. "Captain, you need to see this," Lisa called out as she touched one of the crystals. Jake and Alex hurried over to find that the crystal had activated some kind of display, Images appeared in the air above the panel showing star maps and alien writing that scrolled past too fast to follow. But even though they couldn't read the language, they could understand what they were seeing. The images showed this world as it had been long ago. The dead city around them had once been alive with activity. Strange creatures that walked on 6 legs and had 4 arms worked together building machines and tending to gardens that grew between the buildings. Ships that looked like living things rather than metal constructs flew between the towers carrying passengers and cargo. But the most shocking part was what the star maps revealed. This civilization had not been alone. The crystals showed hundreds of other worlds connected by lines of light, trade routes and communication networks that spanned the entire galaxy, a vast community of different species working together and sharing knowledge across the stars. Jake stared at the display with his mouth open. "How many species are we looking at?" he asked. Lisa was studying the data as fast as she could process it. "At least 1,000 different civilizations, Captain. Maybe more." This was a galactic empire that lasted for tens of thousands of years. "Was." Alex repeated the word with suspicion. "What happened to them?" Lisa touched another crystal, and the images changed. Now they showed the final period of this great civilization. The peaceful scenes of cooperation and trade were replaced by something much darker. Ships fleeing in panic, worlds going dark one by one. The network of light that connected the galaxy slowly shrinking as each star system fell silent. The last images were the most disturbing. They showed the creatures that had built this city hiding in underground shelters. Their 6-legged forms huddled together in fear as something terrible approached their world from space. The final transmission was a simple message repeated over and over in their alien language until even that stopped and the crystal went dark. "They were running from something," Jake said quietly as the display faded. "All of them, an entire galaxy worth of civilizations, and they all ran." "From what?" Alex asked, but none of them had an answer. Lisa was already moving to the next crystal panel. "There has to be more information here, some clue about what destroyed them or where the survivors went." She spent the next 2 hours activating crystal after crystal, but the story was always the same. A great civilization that had connected the stars falling into darkness and silence. Species that had talked to each other across vast distances, suddenly unable or unwilling to communicate. A galaxy that had once been filled with voices, becoming as quiet as a tomb. When they finally returned to the New Horizon that evening, Jake called a meeting of his senior officers. The discovery of the dead civilization changed everything they thought they knew about the universe. They were not the first species to develop space travel. They were not even close to being the first, but they might be the only ones left who were still willing to make noise among the stars. "We need to report this to Earth immediately," Jake announced to his crew. "Command needs to know that we're not alone out here. There are others, or at least there were others." "Should we really be broadcasting our location?" Alex asked with concern. "Whatever destroyed these civilizations might still be out there. If we start sending signals home, we might be telling it where to find us." Jake looked out at the alien city through the ship's windows. Somewhere in those empty buildings was the answer to what had happened to the galaxy. But for now, all they had were questions, and the growing certainty that humanity was stepping into a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. "We came out here to find other life," Jake said finally. "We found it. Now we need to figure out why it died and make sure the same thing doesn't happen to us." As the New Horizon prepared to leave orbit and continue their mission, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from the darkness between the stars. Something out there had silenced an entire galaxy once before, and now humanity was making enough noise to wake it up again.